to as an internal standard. So one thing I would say about this is, are you actually getting internal standards that are not used as an isotopic dilution analog, or are they the internal standards that's looking at process control, essentially instrument drift and like sample to sample variation, which is what internal standards are typically used for, not for quantification correction. So that would be one concern that I would have, whether or not to not include that information. But I don't know how CEDEN currently handles internal standards and whether or not you want to collect that information. It doesn't really have any it's an internal laboratory quality assurance measure, so it doesn't necessarily have that much impact. It doesn't have the impact on data. It's just another kind of data point to show that the data is of high quality. That's all.
Can I jump in? Sorry, I just wanted to announce that I did start the recording a couple minutes late, but thanks.
So Tori, have you asked, I guess you could like ask the lab, or you can also like based on which method they're using, that might give you a clue as to if it's really a regular internal standard or if it's maybe
yeah, I haven't asked the lab. They just have it in their report labeled as an internal standard. So
okay. Like, is it PFAS or is it something?
Oh gosh.
Okay. It's okay if you don't know offhand.
It's like an EPA. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head. I can grab it though.
The actual number of internal standards might be a key too. So for these, it's a one-to-one relationship. So the analog is going to be labeled. It's the same analyte, but it's the analyte with the labeled portion to it. So that's the one-to-one relationship, and that's why you can do a quantification correction, because the behavior it's the same. Versus an internal standard, it's usually one or two, maybe three of them that are identified for all analytes, and it's not a one-to-one relationship. It might be for one of the analytes, but it's not. It's usually kind of a like compound that is supposed to be like a mock. It's supposed to represent what the behavior would be for that a class of the or a different range of the analytes.
Okay, so then I see Lisa was next with her hand up.
Yeah, since our lab is working on all the PFAS methods right now and working with EPA on the UCMR 5, I was wondering if you might want some of that information to use to determine what you're going to do. If this is ever going to be uploaded into the EPA databases, it'd probably be a good idea to match what they're doing.
Which EPA databases? Because they don't use the same name convention.
And CIDWARS.
What was the first one?
CEDEX, the Central Data Exchange.
That might be what uses
and WQX or yeah.
So it's,
that may be helpful, Lisa, but I
Okay,
think
I'll send it over to Jarma so she can see what they're doing.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's only going to be specific for the EPA 533.
Okay.
But that's really similar to the DoD QSM
exactly.
target analytes and the way that that's set up. But I can tell you how the lab views those isotope dilution analogs. They're listed as both internal standards because that's how they're used for the quantitation of their like analyte, but they're also quantitated against separate real internal standards for a recovery to make sure that they are recovering within a certain percent against the calibration curve. If that makes any sense.
Yes, I think it does. Right, that they're used in multiple ways. Yeah, Andrew, I don't know if we can talk more about all this after we hear all the comments. Or Adam, sorry, have a comment?
I just was curious, would these be reported in the same, like surrogates right now are this sort of outlier in that we report them as percent recoveries as opposed to concentrations? And it sounds like maybe from what Lisa said, maybe they're reported more than one way, is that they're reported as a concentration, but also a percent recovery. So I was just confused.
EPA is having
Or
us
just
report
want to
them
know.
as recoveries.
Okay.
Yes, and sorry, we didn't clarify that. We were also thinking percent recovery for these is what the part we would be interested in.
Okay. Because I guess I was curious, just generally, like with the move to CEDEN 2.0 eventually, like when there's a dedicated field for percent recovery, I was curious how it's going to be reported sort of now and moving forward. So now it's like a surrogate, and then in the future maybe there's something a little different.
This is John Strom from CDFA. Could I just jump in here with a comment?
Sure.
I'm still trying to get caught up myself on the PFAS methods, but I'll tell you that from we're getting started up on PFAS here at CDFA, and there have been it appears that there's two different ways to look at some of these compounds. You could look at them as in, I'm going to report a recovery on this surrogate, or you could use that compound, the surrogate or isotope dilution analog, whatever you want to call it. You could use it as just a tool to calculate, to make an adjustment so that it adjusts the results of your analytes. And so, to be honest with you, it is not clear to me yet whether or not there's something to report with some of these compounds, or if they're just used in the background to adjust the calculation of the analytes. Did that make any sense? I guess traditionally I would use a surrogate. The way I prefer to use surrogates is I like to know, okay, was this, what percent recovery was this surrogate? But it appears that the way some people run this method, the PFAS method, that it's used in the background like a true internal standard that is used to adjust the calculation of the analytes, and there's no actual recovery reported for it. Has anybody else come across that situation?
Yeah, I can speak to that. This is Lisa.
Great, thank you.
The method actually says that the isotope dilution analogs have to be quantitated against what they call IPAs, isotope performance analogs, which are used as internal standards, straight against the method. Once those isotope dilution analogs are quantitated against the IPAs, you get a recovery. That recovery has to fall within a certain window in order for the isotope dilution analog to be used to quantitate its like analyte. Does that clear things up?
Yeah, so you're saying that you do report that recovery.
It doesn't state that you have to report it, but you have to calculate it. That's part of the background thing. EPA is requesting that we report those recoveries.
Got
Right.
it. Okay.
So that's what we're asking for here as well. So yes, thank you, Lisa. You said that very well. And so basically we're asking for that recovery to be reported so that we could verify that it met that specified recovery window of the methods. Or
got it. Thanks for letting me jump in there.
Yeah. Any other comments, concerns, questions? So it doesn't sound like there's anyone really opposed to this concept, but I'm wondering if there's maybe a little more detail work if we need to clarify. Tori, did you have another question? I saw you put.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I found the analyte that's getting held up that we tried to transfer to CEDEN, and I don't know, can you even see that in the chat? But it's EPA method 551.1. Is that even applicable? I mean.
No, I don't think that applies to this.
Okay, good. But I got pushback because this was an internal standard. I don't know if we just need to. I tend to not balk at when labs give me stuff. I'm so happy when they give me stuff. I don't want to like say, oh no, don't spit that out for me. But so to me, I would just want to report it to have it. But I guess if CEDEN doesn't want to include it, that's I guess another conversation. But I just wanted to show you what it was.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I know Jarma and Andrew and I have had some conversations of like about the potential for internal standards. But I don't think we came to any conclusions on like we would want to allow them or we definitely wouldn't. So
okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I honestly haven't, I don't know much about this isolog. I don't know much about it. So I'm hoping, when are you guys gonna start implementing it? Is it something that you want to just move forward with, or are you gonna wait for feedback from everyone?
Yeah, I think I was thinking maybe we would see if anybody wanted to give feedback in like the next 2 weeks or so, and then either start implementing after that if everyone seems okay with this plan. I mean, we could wait till the new year, but I know we've got a couple vocabulary requests waiting right now because that sparked this discussion. So I think it'd be great. I know whoever is trying to submit that data would probably like if we could approve those and get those in.
Yeah, I believe it's our crew.
Oh yeah, probably.
I think it's our so.
So
okay.
I don't know. Does that sound okay to everyone? Like 2 weeks in case you come up with another question or?
There was a question in the chat to Seb from Zoe.
Yeah. So asked about, what are the common matrices for these types of methods? Drinking water, definitely for the PFAS constituents. There's a series of EPA methods like the 1600 series that's mainly for like pharmaceuticals and pesticides, some VOCs and SVOCs that I'm blanking. I can't remember if those are specifically for drinking water, if those are more not specific to drinking water, but and then there's like a lab, the SGS Access Lab in Canada, which I know a lot of people use for tissue and maybe some other things. Almost all of their methods are isotope dilution. So a lot of their methods include this. Okay, see, Lisa, maybe you were first and then Cassandra.
I just had a quick note. If you decide to add internal standards in here, you're going to have to allow for 2% recoveries on some of the methods for internal standards because sometimes they're quantitated both against the internal or the calibration curve and against the previous calibration, CCV, continuing calibration. So that's, I think maybe that might be something why you wouldn't want to have the internal standards on there.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think in general we were not interested, but I think it's more just like these cases, maybe like Tori's, where the lab gave them info and then it's like, do we put it in the database or not? Cassandra? Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just getting up to speed on these methods too, but is there a time if we label these iso dilution analogs Is there a time where that like C13C8 or 13C8 compound could be used as a surrogate as well? Or is it always going to be an isodilution analog in a batch? Like, I guess I'm wondering, could it possibly be reported two different ways in the same batch as a surrogate as well as a iso analog?
Lisa, do you want to respond to that, or do you have a separate question?
I can respond to that.
It's great to have lab tell us.
Yeah, the way the methods are written, there are some where you are allowed to choose the compound for your surrogate or your internal standard. And I know in our lab, we have one where it is used both as an internal standard in one method and a surrogate in another method, just because of the limit on what compounds you can get for standards and pricing. We try to keep the price down so we can keep your price down.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So some of these compounds could be in the database more than once, one as a surrogate, one as a isodilution analog. And then I was going to mention too, I think there are some methods where you could kind of choose to do isotope dilution or not. So just the method name, itself doesn't necessarily tell you what the lab did, just to make it a little more complex. Okay, so then we have Cass, or wait a minute, no, Tori.
I'm so sorry. I just want to, so maybe Lisa would know, but when you guys, when it's reported as a data person, I just want to know, when I'm looking at it, will the lab sometimes call it an internal standard when it's an isodilution analog? So every time we get something like that, we would probably need to ask the lab to clarify what exactly it was. Is that, like, if we get a data set, we're gonna have to ask to determine the difference between?
Actually, if you look in the method itself, you can, for the most part, they don't have those crossovers between the isotope dilution analog and the isotope performance analog. So you can pretty much rule out everything. If you do happen to come across one, though, that fits both categories, then you would need to contact your laboratory and ask them if they're using it as an internal standard or as a isotope dilution analog.
Okay.
Or they may actually label it for you. If it's labeled as an IDA, it is used as an isotope dilution analog. If it's labeled as an IPA, that is similar to your internal standard.
Okay, that's good to know. It helps with the data, because sometimes you don't get to talk to the lab as intimately when you're processing data. So that's really good to know. Thank you.
Okay, and then Lisa McCrink.
Yeah, sorry, my question is kind of along those lines. So couldn't it be that one labeled analyte could kind of play double duty on the quantitation front within the same batch? So you might have maybe 5 different analytes that it's helping quantitate, but only one of them would be its direct analog, right? The non-labeled sort of partner within the same batch. So if say the analyte you were interested was not the exact analog, wouldn't it still be, it would still be reported as the analog, but not necessarily used as the isotopic dilution quantitation piece of that? Does that question make sense?
I think so, although I'm just like,
yes, this is Andrew. I think I follow this along, and actually this is a problem. I wouldn't say it's a problem, but with PFAS specifically, what we're requesting through DWQ orders, it's a longer analyte list than there are available analogs, essentially. So what they're doing is some of those analytes don't have that quantitation correction, and they'll use the labeled analyte as a traditional internal standard, and not an IDA, but it would still be reported as an IDA because there is an analyte within that analyte list that they are using it for as an IDA. So you're right, it has a dual function in that sense, but you'll be able to determine that in the database because as an IDA, it's only can be used in that if it's a direct analog to the analyte of interest.
Okay, and then Cass.
Lisa, I don't know if I mean, that made sense to me, and that Lisa's question was my question that I was trying to ask. What is the recommendation for the QA code surrogate corrected in association with this? Is there anything that might change, or what's the guidance on that?
It's a good question. I don't think we worked through the details on that, but okay, I'm just spitballing here. So Andrew and whoever jump in, but because this is like part of the method, you know, of how you quantify it, I would say we wouldn't need a surrogate corrected or a IDA corrected QA code because it's basically just following the method. But Andrew or others, if you have other ideas, feel free to speak up.
I mean, that makes sense to me. You could add another QA code to just for the data user, just to inform them at a different place that there was a correction based on the IDA concentration, but or recovery. But it's based on the actual isotope dilution statistical or quantitation approach.
Can I jump in real quick? Currently, that's the case, but I know just we're getting so many requests to look for additional PFAS. And I see coming up in the future requests for tick PFAS. So you might want to have something in there in case I don't know how the lab will quantitate it, whether they're going to use the closest IDA or if they're going to use the calibration curve itself for quantitating something like that. So that might be something to think about for future.
Okay, so that like we may want to have some sort of way to say which ones were quantified with an IDA and which ones were not.
Correct.
Switching.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I see a comment from John in the chat saying the lab's validated method should indicate which compounds will use IDAs and which are assigned to which analogs. Says the method will often assign multiple analytes to a single IDA, meaning that it's not a one-to-one, but should be similar. I don't know. Does anyone who's more familiar with the nitty-gritty methods have anything to say about that comment, or?
I think that kind of matches what I was saying was you may have multiple compounds quantitated against the same IDA rather than against the calibration curve.
Okay. Got it. Okay, so that's something we'll think about how we could sort of document that.
Okay, so Tessa, do you think when somebody asked about the timeline, you'd suggested maybe waiting a couple weeks to see if anybody thought of anything else before implementing? Do we need to come back with a revised statement of how it would be entered with the QA code before that comment period begins, or do you think that it's close enough as is to accept comments.
Yeah, I was thinking we need to send something out with what we want to do with a QA code or how to mark that. So maybe I'll give maybe 2 weeks after we send that out with a little more info on how we would mark it with a QA code.
Okay, that sounds good. In the meantime, if people think of other issues that weren't brought up or brought up sufficiently, please do send that information to me, and so we can consider it.
And then one other item that we don't need to discuss too much today, but I think that there might be one or maybe two methods already in CEDEN where it looks like it's isotope dilution, but they just marked them all as surrogates. So I think that's another question, is if we would want to dig back into anything old data and update those or just leave them as is. But I think that we can kind of decide that separately.
Okay. All right, so we'll send something out and then have a short comment period. But thank you all, and Tessa and Andrew, for that discussion. And so now we'll move on to our passive sampler related issue that we've been talking about. That didn't work. And sorry, you may have noticed that I switched agendas early on in the item. I had a different version up that wasn't the one that I sent out, so I just switched that one. Sorry if that was confusing. But on to the passive sampler discussion. I had received several comments during the between the meetings about different items. A couple of them are here, so I'll cover those ones first. Marcus suggested putting the sorbent size before in the DLM, the dilution limiting. Oh, I forgot what let me bring up the document and then I'll be able to recall what that stands for. But I do want to take a step back for a second, that we've been working on this passive sampler related entry for a few weeks or a few meetings now, got lots of input, and that's great. So I think we're getting close to finalizing it. And so in this recent version that was sent out, I accepted most of the comments or changes that we had discussed before. So it's a little bit cleaner, but left in some of the more recent changes since the last meeting to highlight those or put them in the agenda as the one I was just talking about with the collection device that's down here. So Marco's suggestion was to put the size closer because there'll always be a size. So instead of putting it after the dilution, or gosh, I can't say, I think that diffusion limiting membrane information, which is only there if there's a diffusion limiting membrane information, that by putting the size first, then it'd be able to sort better, since there's always going to be a size. And then, so I changed that. Also, I put in, switched out the commas in the collection device name with underscores, and which saves some space and might be better when uploading or manipulating data. And took out the units for the size and the pore size that we discussed last time. Again, just in the name, but left it in the description so that, again, saving some space. Maybe if I turn off that would be a little bit better. So those are the changes in regards to collection device. That's the old one. Then we have, we talked about last time, prep preservation, and that we could add some information about preconditioning. And I was looking for some examples of what those preconditioning values might be. And so Marco again gave some recommendations of either field preconditioned or lab preconditioned. So we have what we started with, the field filtered, and then different variations with field filtered and either field preconditioned or lab preconditioned, with this lab filtered, lab preconditioned potentially used for some kind of QC samples. And then I also attached some just information that we talked about this equation last time, and when trying to find out the concentration of analyte per sample water volume. And so just as a reminder, wanted to keep that somewhere. I got a comment from Rich Fadness from Region 1 that for the spat bags, they don't produce you can't use them to calculate a concentration over time. Sorry, I got some comments. Tori?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like ruin your role here, but for the prep preservation, I'm sorry. In my mind, I kept on thinking that we always did what happened first. And wouldn't the I'm sorry, wouldn't the conditioning part come first? Or maybe I got that wrong. Like the preconditioning, doesn't that come before it actually filters? Or I could be wrong. We don't do that, but I thought it was always
we did alphabetical.
Uh-oh. It's
Pretty
not
sure we do
alphabetical for sure.
order of operation.
Yeah, order of operation. Yeah. Thank you for. I knew
You
that was
asked
something
exactly,
in my mind.
exactly the question I was asking. Like,
Oh,
literally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just
so I think the precondition part, if I'm understanding it right, would happen prior. Like it happens to whatever it is first, and then, right?
It seems like it.
Yeah, I'm honestly not positive, but that's what I was envisioning in my mind, which could
Yeah,
be completely wrong.
Yeah, sorry, this is Marco. The preconditioning does come first. I thought it was alphabetical.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's order of operation. Is Stacy on? Where's Stacy?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, that was the intent when we first started, was it the order of operations, yes.
Okay, must be
so if
Q8.
you do field filtered, field frozen.
Yeah.
Obviously you wouldn't freeze before you filtered, or filter and then acidify, or yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tori. I had the wrong business role here. All right, so just a note that, again, spat bags are not appropriate for calculating concentration over time. So I suggested being in some cases it could be analyte per mass, just to leave more wiggle room there, that it's not always appropriate to make that conversion or calculation. And then, as suggested last meeting from Tiffany, I contacted David Alvarez, and he talked about, I put his main text, most of his text from his emails here, and that they report mass of analyte per sampler. So example of nanograms per POSIS. He talks about some reasons they do that. And so then I asked that because of a change that we'd made last time, that if you had multiple sorbents, those would be considered replicates of each other. And he gave information back, and that that could be done, but most likely you'd either sum up, you'd analyze all of those sorbents together and get one result. And again, giving you a gram per, or nanograms mass per device, or you would analyze for different analytes with those different sorbents. So with that information for the replicate, I suggested keeping one option being what we had before. So if there's one sorbent exposed within a housing, you just use one. If there are multiple sorbents and it's exposed at the same time, if it was each sorbent was analyzed for the same analyte separately, that's the one that we had before. You use the sequential number in the replicate. If it was analyzed for different, or each one was analyzed for different analytes, the replicate would be one. And if it were combined, the sorbents were combined and analyzed for one analyte, the replicate would be one. So it made it a little more complicated, but I think it covers the different scenarios. Marco, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks, Sharma. I was a little surprised. Well, I don't know, maybe not surprised, but just my inexperience with chem data, that I didn't realize that people could combine extracts like that. And I was just wondering, is that typical? Do we have to like note that, like whether somebody combined 3 different extracts into one for analysis versus just having one single extract for analysis? I just don't know.
This is Jenny Munster, City of Santa Cruz. We've been using SPMDs for quite some time now, and so typically what happens is they're not like, you're not really combining extracts. So we'll have the stream of waste, and then you put, say, 4 SPMDs in a canister and run them at the same time. So when those 4 membranes go back to the lab to get processed, they just make one extract out of all 4. Does that make sense?
Marco, did that make sense?
Yeah, but how are they combining them into get one extract?
They like blow them down, and I don't know, I've never done it, but they process them into one extract, like all at one time.
I guess to me it just seems like that's a difference of 4 versus just processing one disc to get an extract. So it seems, I don't know if it's something that should be noted, because it seems like you're kind of quadrupling your chances seeing a detection.
Yeah, which is why you use more than one, is because you want to increase your chances of detecting. So like David Alvarez's comment states, when you then get a mass back from the lab of the extract, then you divide it by how many SPMDs you used or you deployed, so that you're still getting a nanogram per SPMD value that you then plug into the water calculator. But so like we'll use 4 in our final effluent, but only like 1 in the river, just because we want to have better detection in our final effluent.
So I guess we just have to be clear in the guidance that if you do something like that, you have to make sure that your final number is divided by the number of collection devices were used in that extract.
Yeah, and I think that was pretty clear in the document that we've been working on about the replicates. That made sense to me, but maybe just because I've been working with these for a decade. Yeah, it says if the sorbents were combined and analyzed for one analyte, the replicate number should be 1. Yeah. I don't know if that would be the appropriate place to indicate to make sure the data is reduced to represent concentration per sorbent.
Yeah, and yeah, it doesn't, seems like maybe a different place.
Yeah.
Result maybe? I mean, I actually don't.
Yeah, probably
I
somewhere in the results.
Result on this list, so that's kind of funny. Maybe we'll make one.
Yeah, thanks. It just seems pretty important, you know, because I know that people with their individual projects know what they do, but once this goes into CEDEN and it's available for public use, you know, people are just going to be pulling large chunks of data and comparing the data. And so we want to make sure that the results are comparable and that we're not comparing results from one disk against results from 4 disks.
Yeah, I guess I can see that.
This is Cajun James. I've been working on a project for this past year using these with Marco. And what we found is, you know, we're using 2 main disks, anion, SBX, and we find sometimes surprising to me some variation, like we'll put 3 or 6 disks in a chem catcher that are all the same. And we are getting a variability, but we're not compositing them. So I think some of this is us not being familiar, you know, this is a new project, but I think it would be very important as a member of the regulated public to know if it's a composite or if it's an individual value that's being reported, mostly because if I would try to compare what I'm doing maybe to what another researcher's doing, that would help me understand if there's a difference or if there's a, you know, large difference or small difference or what's going on. And we're not working in the oceans or effluent, you know, we would be working in surface water streams.
Okay, so so John, you noted that your lab does not combine them. How do you, if there are multiple sorbents, do you treat them as replicates then?
Well, I have not had different types of sorbents at the same time. I'm not sure if that's what you mean, but or just either way, whether it's different types or just the same. Every individual sampler is analyzed separately with its own reported value at the end.
So the sampler could contain multiple, I'm going to use disks, even though I know they're not all disks, within the same housing. Do you consider that one sampler, or Do you have
Well,
that?
I haven't, okay, I haven't come across that yet.
Okay.
If I were to develop a method, I would probably want a different method for each one because I assume that they don't all, I'm just assuming they don't all like the same extraction solvent, but I don't know.
Okay.
So probably I would do them all separately.
Do them separately. Thank you. And Jenny, do you still have, is this a new hand or is your hand up from before?
I don't know how to unraise my hand.
Oh,
here we go, lower hand.
Yeah, I got it. Great, thank you. All right, so we want to say that if you do combine them, recognizing that not everybody combined them, that you need to divide your result by the number of sorbents you combined.
Or I would say the results should be reduced to mass per sorbent.
Okay.
Oh, who's got the feedback?
I don't, that sounds muffled to me. Okay. So I think I need to figure this out a little bit more to sure we're, I feel like I'm using the wrong terms or something.
And like Marco was saying, will there be where will it be noted how many they used in like in the comments or something?
Well, if you're averaging.
We're not averaging, we're combining. Oh. Yeah.
Okay, so when you say.
Well, then I guess when you reduce it, then it might
I mean, that to me,
like an average.
that's how I was interpreting.
Yeah, but we would obviously increase our detection limit if we only had one sorbent versus the 4 sorbents. You get more mass, you get more stuff to see.
But then in the end, you reduce it, which.
Yeah, and that's true. I guess that's an average. Yeah.
Okay. Adam?
I am a little ignorant about how these things work, but given that they're different sized discs, and they aren't being required to reduce different sized discs to concentrations, couldn't it just be treated as a different collection device name? In that it's, the collection device name seems to be trying to indicate how much of the sorbent is being used already.
So it would, in that collection device, you'd be also indicating because we give the size, like you pointed out, Adam, if we're giving the size, but then you're actually using 3 discs, you would put that in there as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know the different sizes of discs, but like I'm assuming that the reason we have size is because, if someone's presenting a mass that's recovered off of, a 47 millimeter disc versus a 70 millimeter disc, those need to be treated differently. And so sort of, to me, it seems this sort of the same general idea that it's like, oh, the difference between 1 47 millimeter disc and 3 47 millimeter discs is like there, versus trying to mess around with replicate but maybe that's wrong, like, because I haven't dealt enough with these but that was my thought.
Okay. We're almost to the end already, so
yeah, I agree, though. It should be somewhere in the description if we want to record it somewhere. I can't think of where else it might go.
Okay, so we could put them in the collection device somehow, or the comment. I just wanted to cover a couple other things here. And then Marco had suggested a kind of similarity with reporting chlorophyll data, that there's kind of 2 ways to report it and using different templates, and that potentially we could do something like that, because we have our, our result from the sorbent analysis, and then the calculated water concentration. And we've talked about how that you can't always do that, or you might not have the right sampling rate coefficient, but some people are pretty sure about that number, and it would be easier to report it, or easier to use if people reported it like that. So I don't think we have time to get into it right now, but that was his suggestion that we could potentially talk about. So sorry, we're already ran out of time, but if there's any last comments for this time, I'll try to get a better handle on multiple sorbents in a device, and see how we can represent that in the data entry. And if not, if nobody else has any quick comments to say, then I want to thank you again for joining me today.